what do you actually think a growing number of mass editorial board resignations signify for our publishing world?
To answer that question, we have to start at the beginning. In fact, you mentioned that there were 8 journal resignations since 2023. Actually, it's 19. And I went through, I connected the links on that website and went to the actual journal lists. And I think it's important for me to give you an idea of the journals that have had resignations and the reasons. Then I'm going to say something about the business model that has led to this, because it's fundamental to why their resignations are happening. So just to give you the list, and this is only since 2023, I'll say a little bit more about what happened before then. Journal of Biography, Biogeography, sorry. That was over open access policies and fees. Kurdish Studies, they resigned. There was a takeover by Intellectual Edge Research Publishing, and they weren't happy about that. Critical Public Health, open access policies and fees were of concern. Neuroimage and neuro reports, etc. Again, open access fees. Design Studies, replacement of editor-in-chief, editorial interference to increase output and scope. And that is a really critical issue that goes with open access, but I'll return to that. Journal of Geometric Mechanics, switch to open access and editorial interference to increase output and special issues. Publications, that was over the company's predatory publishing practices. eLife, institution of no reject publishing model, no reject. Firing of the editor-in-chief. Journal of International Students, transition to new management with open access fees. Journal of Political Philosophy, dispute over publication volume that led to the editor being fired by the publisher. Sustainable Organizations section of the Frontiers in Sustainability, pressure on and treatment of reviewers. This is the one on that focused on reviewers and pressuring them. Where are we? And you can, if you go to this website, you can actually see the resignation letters, which I don't have time to go into in great depth. Econometrics, which is an interesting one. Editors and publisher were unable to agree on an overarching strategy for the development of the journal. This is since 2023. Aquatic Conservation, Marine and Freshwater Ecosystems. Editorial board resignations after editors-in-chief contracts were not renewed. Theory and Society, replacement of editor-in-chief against editorial board wishes. Journal of Economic Surveys, objections to proposed volume growth. BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth, objections to journal's failure to handle allegations. Gender Work and Organisation, that was this year. I've moved into what's happened this year. Protest of an anti-woke drive against radical views in the pursuit of profits. Syntax, to protest changes imposed unilaterally by the publisher. Philosophy and Public Affairs, because scholarly journals, including our own, serve important purposes, and these purposes are not well served by commercial publishing. The worst players, if you like, are Wiley, in my reading, and Taylor and Francis. The mass resignations of these editors from scholarly journals are not new. They actually go back to 1989, but the frequency has increased. And there are different reasons for mass resignations, but really from 2015 to 2023, there were 16 resignations. Medical journals and health journals, diversity and distribution, and they basically covered similar issues to the ones I read out, including layoffs of staff, not just the editors, but really it keeps going around this editorial interference and open access policies. Now, the key issue for a number of journals related to demands by the publishers, for either resignations or the sacking or changes in editorial policy enforced by publishers. And it's basically linked to their business model, as Amanda mentioned. The mass resignations, I think, illustrate major concerns scholars have over the current state of academic publishing generally. But this goes to the questions of ownership and control and the business models. And in one of the things I was reading, they referred to the fact that we as scholars are being enslaved. And so this is a really interesting play on the modern slavery discussion. What we see, and there's a scholar at Montreal that's been writing about oligopolies in academic publishing for some years. But basically, it's important to recognise, as I discovered accidentally when I was Associate Dean Research at Macquarie University, that these oligopolies are not just about journal ownership, because at the same time, these companies own the research management systems that our universities buy to track our research, our impact factors, et cetera, et cetera. These companies also own the university ranking systems and also, of course, citations, impact, and so on. So I call it the digital octopus, right? And as Amanda said, this business model is based on our free labour, but actually it's not free labour because our institutions are paying, and if the majority of us are in public institutions, it's actually government and taxpayers that are paying for this business model. The profits are immense. I don't have time to go into those here, but I think it's very important to recognise that the whole system is built on a tailorist system. And we see this really clearly, not only in the systems, Scholar One, et cetera, and how they track and then tell us what to do and how to do it and so on. But also, how many of you know about publons? Publons. So this, at the end, if you are a reviewer, first of all, if you're a reviewer, you are given a time scale, which we know we need to have the time scale, but it's very tayloristic in the way it's actually managed. But to actually, once you've done the review, it offers you to explain it in publons. And then this system, which they then own the data, right? They already own our data through the research management systems, because then they have all of the access to what we're doing and what we're publishing. It's frightening, especially if you then connect it to AI, which I'm not going to talk about. Basically, you claim it on publons and they have a way of tracking your PUBLONS. ONS. And Sage recently told us, when they said, you can tell them that they can claim the value and be recognized for this. And I said, absolutely not. I will not have this. Sage has gone into a different system. They don't use publons or publon or whatever, however you pronounce it. They're using a different system. Nonetheless, it's the same. Yeah. Okay. So basically, this has led to a reaction. The editors of organisation and management journals met to deal with concerns, particularly around contracts, around the journal ownership. And they formed an organisation called OMEN, which is the Organisation and Management Editors Network. It's an international network of editors which seeks to provide a networking platform where editors can discuss issues of common concern, encourage capacity building by offering training events for editors, and providing a vehicle to comment on issues and developments in the field of organisational and management studies. At the moment, it's a network of over 60 individual editors-in-chief, from over 35 leading management and business studies journals. It's been set up as a charity in the UK. It's got a constitution, it's got a network, it's got a website, and its mission is to advance and advocate for appropriate standards and the craft of editorial work. Because at a URAM conference I went to, where there was a meeting of the editors who set it up, basically they were talking about how some publishers will want to replace us entirely. And I think this is really an important innovation, and I recommend that the editors of industrial relations related journals form a similar network, because I think that in relation to work, employment relations and so on, we have a double whammy, because we have a delegitimization around what we do and the critical perspectives that we adopt, which is somewhat different from the organisation and management journals. Here endeth my tale.
An enlightening and important launching point. So, Valeria, I'd like to turn to you next. WES, right, is obviously a very high-ranking journal, very prestigious. It even showed up on the Deakin list, which not all journals do. But of course, one of the things that I spoke to the doctoral students about, and I've seen this, is, I mean, we're now training students not to read anything that's not in an A or an A-star journal, which to me is absolutely terrifying for knowledge production and exchange. Yeah. How can we challenge the current over-reliance on citation metrics and journal rankings that distort academic incentives by favoring quantity over quality at times, and perpetuate biases in scholarly evaluation?
I think that before, we provide a kind of solution to challenge the problem, we need to know what the problem is about. And so I want to spend a couple of minutes discussing about that. And I think that, to me at least, in large part, is the highly competitive environment for funding and career promotions, particularly, which pushes researchers as us to submit predominantly to highly ranked or ranking journals and stimulate the quantitative over the qualitative important bunch of publication that you just mentioned, and of course keep rankings and these metrics being alive. So, well, there is also another interesting tendency that I've been kind of documenting myself before coming here, which I didn't know even the existence, but actually there is the existence of these called positive biased findings. I don't know whether, you have bumped into these kind of things, which strongly seems to marry this kind of model I was talking about. And, what this is about. It is about a kind of publication bias, which occurs when the publication of research results depends not just on the quality of the research, but also on the hypotheses which are tested and the significance and direction of the effects which are basically detected. So this positive results bias occurs when authors are more likely to submit, or editors are more likely to accept positive results than negative or inconclusive results. So at the end of the day, to be, very kind of easily said, so you can imagine that all the kind of tendency that this kind of system would generate, because a tendency is to submit work which more likely leads to this kind of positive results for publication, knowing that they are more likely to be considered for publication by editors, more favorably reviewed also by peers, and once published, more likely to be cited. And for editors, on the other hand, it is the competition for citation index, which I think is also an interesting thing to say, and also the financial survival of these journals that makes it more attractive to publish these positive findings. Now, so if we want to tackle these kind of issues, we need to think about alternative ways of how to challenge this kind of current over-reliance, I would say, on citation metrics and journal rankings. And this is a very complex kind of exercise, I would say. Why? Particularly also because, and sorry to be too much critical, but I think that our universities are particularly the key actors in this kind of process, because they introduce what we normally know being the kind of impact evaluation. Interest in impact evaluation, we know that has been growing very rapidly, as also governments and research funders around the world have been increasing, trying to seek evidence of the value of the research investment to society. So we have seen these in different ways. I mean, I would hear, because I have an experience of working in the UK previously, then going to Belgium. Now, Belgium is becoming like the UK, which is very interesting. Since a couple of years, I said, oh, I escaped the UK, but no, you're in Belgium. So, and well, there is in fact, and this was also kind of intensified discussion about how to measure the quality of research and how to evaluate the societal value of research in order to provide public research fundings with evidence to justify budgetary requests to governments. And here particularly important is the assessment of non-academic impact, particularly by the UK and the so-called ref. Now, I know that this ref stuff is probably, I don't know where it's going, but yes. So, and yeah, so basically there is this growing trend to evaluate research impact at the national scale around the world. So you have, let's say that there is this kind of so if we want to define the benefits of research, or if we think about how to define the benefits of research, this needs to be measured through this kind of index and quantified. But we know that this is not really an objective element or something that we can objectively do. It's also quite a highly subjective process. And basically this kind of subjectivity is also not taken into consideration in the way in which mainly the system work. On the other hand, I think that we do have methods which are in place to evaluate this kind of research impact. And therefore, to me, at least, it seems that perhaps what we might want to do is to pick up the methods which might suit best our purposes, or at least to invent a new method which, could respond to our criticality. It is also clear that when we look at the kind of societal impact, and this is particularly important in our field, I think, there is also a kind of stretching between quantitative and quantitative sort of research that we do. And this also has some sort of implication also in this kind of process. What can we do? As I said, we need to provide new ways to think about new methods. So provide holistic or adaptive framework within which we can think, in fact, critically about a diverse range of way of assessing impacts for research from any kind of discipline. And I think we from humanities, we are always in a kind of, I would say, critical position vis-a-vis other science. And this is also reflected in these metrics of journals between and inside humanities, because, of course, we do know that, in humanities, some work that is done, well, I wouldn't say directly our work because I don't want to put a finger, but, it is actually very difficult sometimes to see, okay, what is the value, what is the impact that we are kind of generating. And particularly when you do critical work, this is even more difficult. So going back to what I was saying, I think we need to kind of rethink or think about ways that could take that into consideration. So we need perhaps a new comprehensive research impact evaluation sort of typology, new methodological framework to think around it, which are based on an analysis of evaluation framework from multiple disciplines. So try to kind of overcome that sort of differentiation between humanities and other disciplines, and also perhaps within our own discipline. We need also perhaps to think about creating funding opportunities that could support collaborations across different disciplines, and could lead to innovative solutions and reduce, in fact, the focus on this traditional form of metrics. Now, going back to what Lucy was saying, does this mean that we need also to advocate for open science, open access? I would say probably not. And I have to say, yes, that I've been also resigning from as a chief editor from the session on work organization and employment in the Frontiers of Sociology journal because of the reason you were mentioning, Lucy. So thank you for putting this on the floor. So I haven't written a letter. I just just said I'm not gonna do this anymore. So we need to think about broader evaluation criteria, thinking behind, the kind of way in which we are evaluated today, and develop more comprehensive, I would say, impact assessment, which, as said before, could include, qualitative assessment of social influence, but also look at this kind of boundaries situation between particularly humanities and exact science, because I think this is another important aspect that we need to take into account. I mean, sometimes you see these journals with, kind of exponential metrics, nature or whatsoever. And so that's quite scary, right? Yeah.
Philippe, I'd like to turn to you now. One of the thorny issues that we're facing, of course, and we talk about it all the time in the context of teaching, is machine learning and computer generated content, right? So AI. One of the big issues that I don't think, this is just me personally, that we're doing a terribly good job of wrestling with in the publishing world, is trying to catch up with how this is going to impact the publishing landscape, particularly when you combine it with publish in volume, please, right? We want you to publish quickly and in volume. And here's a tool that completely potentially compromises all of our, acquisition of knowledge. So, and how we communicate. So I guess the question is, how can editorial teams, and also, so this is going to crop up, there's quite a bit of work around this on COPE and at COPE, which is the Committee for Publication Ethics, the national body. It's not just going to be submissions, it's peer reviews that will come back that have been done by ChatGPT. So this has the potential to really throw the whole system in crisis. Do you have any thoughts and comments about how we might think through questions of credibility and authenticity?
Yes, thank you for this very difficult question. And I'm not sure I can speak 10 minutes about that. But before doing that, I would like to react a little bit from the previous perspective, just because Transfer is a kind of very different journal. It was owned by the Institute. And then at one point, we had the problem that young scholars were not publishing, or they finished their PhD and that was the fifth article because they need to have some point for the career. So we had nice older militant professor, but this was not what we want, because we want to have new ideas. So we moved to the system. There was discussion, we were to Sage, and we tried to have some credit. And at the end of the day, I think it's not bad. We're surprised that we have a higher ranking that we thought that we will be really the last of the list. It was not bad. But no, and that's my point. I will return for the story. I was wondering, because this industry is changing, why we are still dependent of Sage? Why we cannot return to the institute? So I said that once, and people say, "Okay, Philippe, for the next meeting too." But frankly, where is the added value to return? No, we have the credibility, and we can return or not. So my point is more, we can have more people changing. And the previous director of the institute research, Nicolas Conturi, say, "Okay, but we revive at the UCL in London, our own series, because then we can publish in-house, which was before we tried to have Oxford, etc. No point with Oxford. So why not to use internal stuff to have exactly the same product?" So I think is the broad question. So I return to the real, no, I've already 3 minutes less, so I could perhaps answer for the rest. We had this question for Sage saying, "Okay, what is the publisher? What is your policy about that?" Because we had no idea. And they said it was rather surprising. Say it's not completely clear, but in some journal, ChatGPT can be a co-author. So you publish Philippe Pochet and ChatGPT. Okay, that's interesting. Author rights, you pay the author right to ChatGPT or what they take. And they say, in any case, you have to have if you use that, you have to have some reference, and you have to say that the article was done with the help. So, okay, I don't know in which domain there is, perhaps in mathematics or art science, but apparently for the Sage, it's not a problem. It's kind of, perhaps the future will be our article just with ChatGPT. So for us, we had the question, the answer, and say, okay, let's think about that. But that's a little bit strange. Then if you take another perspective, and what you say, in our teaching, I don't know what is the situation because it's changing, but I had a meeting for the Collège de Bruges, and it was really clear. Nobody can use a ChatGPT. Nobody, no student. If you see that, that's kind of the odd. So and that's my speech. In one, the publisher say it's nice, you can have a co-author, and in the daily life, I suppose to not use ChatGPT. My student not use ChatGPT, as it's forbidden. The kind of, and then you have the question that, how do we control? And they say, oh, you cannot control because most of us we have too many master theses and control. You cannot have 3 students that you can follow in detail, and then you can see what is happening. So you have there kind of clear instruction of something that you cannot control, which doesn't make sense. So you have the second perspective. And the third perspective, I say, okay, how can I apply that to myself? So that's kind of, I'm writing, it's not a policy brief. I use ChatGPT to say, could you improve my French? Because I have a QWERTY, there is no accent. And can you translate all the directive in French, etc. And the result was not bad. Look, I checked, it was kind of not perfect, it's not bad. So this afternoon, I continue a little bit the article. I will continue to ask ChatGPT. But in that system, should I say, certainly not, it's written with ChatGPT, but should I say, with the help of ChatGPT, with the kind of tool as a normal tool? So if we apply that, it's my experience, I will continue. Where do we think that we should say, as the publisher say, my co-author is ChatGPT, or I would like to thank my friend, blah, 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 helping, and ChatGPT along the long list of people helping to do that. I think it's not very clear. When more, I think, where is the limit when I should recognize that ChatGPT is part of the story of my writing? It's not very clear. So I don't know what is your opinion. I'll let some minute for you to have that. But for me, it's not very clear. And I'm not the most advanced in using that. But in the same time, step by step, I think everyone will try that. And we will touch the limit. And then you have 3 very different perspectives: editor, university, and yourself. And the last one, I was wondering, but where is the problem in our field? We have a rather limited field. We don't have millions of scholars that we cannot control. Most of the articles that we receive, we know the person, we can go on Google to verify who are the people. It's not kind of huge community. It's limited community. So you can have more control than in other fields. What we are supposed to have, we are supposed to have articles which are bringing something new. It's not very clear that ChatGPT at that stage is able to bring something new. It can do a nice review of literature. Okay. But is that different if you ask a PhD student to do that for you and don't credit the PhD student, which happen in some case, or perhaps many cases? No, but that's the question you are supposed, and that's the role of the editorial board, and where you send, you are supposed to know the field. If the article is kind of good summary of the idea which are in the air, okay, but you will not accept. You will say nice, but bring nothing new to the literature. So my point perhaps is defensive, because in the next step, ChatGPT, we can say, find something new, and most of the time that was be not interesting, but 1 on 10 there is kind of new idea that you don't find, but it's unable to bring new ideas. It's doing good connection between what is existing at BESO. Is that so much a challenge for this field? I think it's other field that they have engineer, that they have kind of huge, and you don't know, could be more, but for our field, not. So I think that's to summarize. I think we can have different perspective. We will test, I think, personally, because we will use that more and more in the future. So what is the limit of that? But what is still, because that's the point of this meeting, incredible is the sage saying it can be already a quoter. So you have you are another world that is thinking that perhaps you have a journal of ChatGPT.
You've raised some really important and provocative points, and thank you. And you've also set us up beautifully for the next question. Excuse me, because it is a tool, right? And the question is, how do we use the tool and to what effect? So we can also think about this and I really like the idea of it's not terribly good. We also know in the arts and creative industries, it's not terribly good at being creative yet. However, how do you use that tool to create progressive change, right? It's not just the robots are taking our jobs. So one of the things that I'd like to pose to you, Tania, as an expert in EDI, is can you comment on whether you think there's ways for us to ethically use AI to increase access for second language scholars and other marginalized communities to get over that giant knowledge gap that we see that plays out across so many levels?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Amanda, for this beautiful question. But let me say that, I had some really interesting time and looking into it and trying to answer it maybe in a structured way. First, I would like to say that Relations Industrielles, industrial relation, is bilingual. So it's a very good question to be asked to Relations Industrielles. It's now open access. It's on Érudit. It's located at the university, so not under the big, publishers' houses. And it has more than 80 years. And it's a pillar in industrial relation, as we know. So to be able to answer your question, I thought, okay, if you want to use ChatGPT, you have to be able to use ChatGPT. So I started by trying to look at some of the examples of policies, exactly what Philippe was saying, adopted by some academic publisher. I would give you a few examples. Nature and Science, for instance, they prohibit the use of generative AI for writing manuscripts, for interpreting results, to ensure human contribution. So prohibition of ChatGPT for writing. Springer Nature requires that any use of AI be explicitly mentioned in the manuscript to maintain transparency. However, it doesn't say if you can do it, not do it, if you're going to be rewarded or criticized for it. So again, can you use it as a to assist you and then say, okay, I have used it, because you have to declare it? So how will that count? Ethical guidelines and data protection is the case for Elsevier, who enforces rules that ensure that AI use complies with ethical standards and privacy regulation. But again, very wide declaration. Prohibition of AI as an author, this is wily. So you cannot put your name Saba and ChatGPT, they cannot publish together. And because they prefer to be credited as authors, reserving authorship for humans to maintain accountability. Of course, you cannot sue ChatGPT. I mean, they have tried, and for published content. And Taylor and Francis went further. It employs specialized tools to detect if the texts are AI-generated content and prevent plagiarism and inaccuracies. So we are on defensive mode. We are very much on regulating the use of AI, and we are not at all in what can AI do for publishing. It's not really regulated in a positive way. It's more regulated as, in terms of prohibition. So I thought, okay, let's look at some of the advantages. Some of you, I'm sure, I use ChatGPT, and I always I'm sometimes saying, oh my God, what kind of crap is this? Or sometimes said, oh my God, not bad. So, you cannot say it's good all the way, and you cannot say it's bad all the way. It's true that it enhances linguistic capabilities, okay? So valuable tool for authors in writing, this we have seen, and especially those writing in a second language. Optimizing the writing process, you can rephrase, enhance fluidity. You can also automatically format bibliographies and references, which is, imagine that. How many hours does this take? Yeah, okay. Exactly, the comma that you forget and the number of the, okay. You can also extract information. So if you utilize to extract information from text or from press reviews, for instance, or create, some summaries, but for publicly available documents. I've tried doing some, the resume or the summary of some text. Not always that good, but if it's really clear and, the text is maybe shorter, etc. So, and you can even use it to validate some references and ensure their accuracy, like Statistic Canada, the numbers of something. So when the information is there, you can access it and access it quickly. The risks are the reliability of, artificial intelligence, especially if it's done without human validation. I don't think that you should just take a text and put it out there without really looking. And again, to do that, you need to have the knowledge. So again, like for student use or something like this, if they're only using ChatGPT, you catch them in a second, because you know that they haven't gone through the readings, etc. And this is easy to find out. Also, inappropriate use in critical context, like reviewing theoretical framework. It doesn't do that good. Developing research questions, it can give you a few ideas, but I don't think it goes far enough. Interpreting research results, not that great. It can maybe help, give you a few insights, but not enough. And unreliable automated summary, this I have tried. Intellectual property and copyright is a main issue, potential to the attribution of rights for AI-generated content when it's coming from, but the thing is, if you ask the system for reference every time, it gives you the references, but I'm not sure that it gives you the right references. So if you have written something on that subject, I'm not sure that it goes through very thorough research in that sense, and I think that this is a big risk. So to answer your great question, Amanda, I said, okay, let's apply the framework that we use in industrial relations for looking at work, etc., and say, how can you make technology work for us instead of, always be frightened and threatened by technology and trying to limit the use of technology? And I said, okay. One, maybe artificial intelligence as a collaborative tool, not a replacement. So every time you see that it's doing something instead of you and not with you, maybe it's not a good idea to use it. So again, so the human oversight is essential. The need for training and literacy on the AI use, I think this is very important, to train authors, to train editors, because even if you have a policy, what does this mean? Can you really prohibit the use of ChatGPT? Is it a good idea? And you see, even in some submission of the grants now, you see you cannot use in the big grant. I mean, I'm not sure that if you want to have like the budget explained and you you go through the help of ChatGPT, it's like 10 hours that you save. Maybe put them on the lit review. This would be more interesting. Also, some literacy programs, AI literacy program, and this we see everywhere. If you're publishing, you don't really know much about AI. So it's always this question of what can AI do? What are the limits of AI? So that would be a good idea. The challenge of copyright and intellectual property, it has to be resolved, addressing the copyright concerns. So not to be using any content that is generated and you are just taking it from somewhere else. And have established clear standards on how and when to attribute the AI's contribution. Not an author, but what? Quality control and the accuracy of AI generated content. So ensuring the content is accurate. And again, this is a human, and the publisher can have some mechanism to verify the accuracy of the AI generated content. Regularly updates and audits of the AI system. So, you put some responsibility also on the whoever is putting ChatGPT in place. Implications for diversity and inclusion. Again, the same bias that you have in system, you can have it again in ChatGPT in whatever you're doing, and you can replicate and amplify the bias. Also, the equal access to AI tools, if it's going to help, through second language or some underrepresented, groups in terms of publications, etc. Well, you have to give them the access also to the tool, and again, make sure that the rules that they're playing by or that they're using is not going to disadvantage them and saying, okay, so you have used ChatGPT, so it's not really your article, whether someone that's an English speaking or as the mother tongue is English would not be judged by the same standards. Future proofing of AI policies. So far, the policies are very, general, so you don't really know how to apply them. And engaging with stakeholders. Everyone has to be on the same page. I hope, dear Amanda, that I have answered.
We've had 4 really interesting presentations from our panelists. They've all raised a whole bunch of really interesting issues. Everything from the business model to why do we even need academic publishers anyway? And why are we counting academic citations when we're the ones that invent the evaluative tools? So, seize the means of production and let's stage a revolution. And the really important points, Tania, I think that you raised around AI and its ethical dimensions and its potential and how we conceptualize it. And you're right, it's still a little bit of an out there. Oh, it's scary, it's terrifying. But how do we use it ethically and and accountability, I think, is key. One of the things that occurs to me in this conversation is lots of these, let me be the provocateur. Lots of these sound like great ideas, but they also sound like a lot more work for us, right? So if we want to reclaim our journals and do them in-house, you're right. We totally could, because we don't publish hard copy journals very often anymore. But then we are taking all of that work in-house, right? And we are under conditions that are, I don't know how life is in the UK or Canada. It's a bit of a pressure cooker down in Oz. So, I'm just going to put that out there as well. But I think that's important work. And so much of the work we do is busy work. So maybe, Tania, you're right. Maybe I should have ChatGPT doing more of my stuff so that I can free up some time to reclaim the means of production. I would like to open the floor to questions.
So far, the conversation has been very much about senior people who are already in jobs. What the key here is, we've not had any conversation about what does this mean for young scholars who are competing for, I mean, you're nodding your head as well, because I know you're part of HEC. All of you are trying to find work. There are hundreds, thousands of applications. And therefore, it's not just about our work as editors or whatever. More important is, it's great if you decide to do that, but it could impact a young person's chance of ever getting a job at any credible institution. So if you revolutionize this, that's all very well. But I think you really have to be mindful. We've got a ton of we take more and more, Philippe, your point is, we take more and more graduate students in all the time. There are more and more people coming out with PhDs and with masters, and it's hard for them to find a way of disseminating, whether it be in a more public, popular way or through peer review. So I think that has to be our primary concern, is for the people behind us, not for protecting ourselves.
Je vais parler en français. You can put your headphone. OK. Je suis Naomi Jean-Baptiste Vignier de l'Université Laval et je suis très intéressée à la publication. Et je fais partie de l'association des étudiants gradués de l'Université Laval et il y a la revue de relations industrielles. Et l'année dernière, last year we planned a conference for the first conference about publishing. And it was like, this was full of students. It was like everybody was interested in publishing, and we put it up. We have the director of the Industrial Relation Journal was there, and students also. And this year, we will plan the same thing. And it's like we had 8 journals only in the social science faculty, but no students know that. And it's not like we know about the publishing world. We don't have knowledge, information about that. And it's like, for many of us, it's like a senior thing, and you have to navigate and have a certain network to get support to, it's not like publishing is part of academic, and for me, it's like, it's not a side job or side education or side. This has to be part of that, of the academic training that we are getting at the university. And also when Lucia talked about the network, we have the publisher, the editor have to have a network. And I say, this can be good, but young publisher, young people that young academic are already aside the actual network, how we can get them in those network to think about the future of publishing. We can't talk about that without them. And we have also those concern about ChatGPT, about how we're gonna publish if now ChatGPT can be editor like us. How are we gonna do that? How are we gonna get a job? And it's really, really a lot of concern for us. And we can, for me especially, I can't find a space to talk about that. I had through my association, create that space last year and this year for students to come and to know about that and to have a chance to talk with senior about their concern. But it's not, we create that space as student association, but we are not invited in the publisher space.
I think it is a really important point that Charlotte raised and that you've raised. I think it's a really important issue that has been raised. It's a fake mic. I have two things I wanted to say. We at the Journal of Industrial Relations are very concerned about what you're talking about. Also, for the sustainability of the field, it's important that we have the young up-and-coming people. We've done that through an early career researcher. We called it a traineeship. Now we have to change the name because the industrial laws have changed in Australia. And so traineeships can only be paid for. This is voluntary, so because we don't have the funds. So it's a mentorship scheme. So it's open call, right? And, you know, it's not many, but it's a start. We have a buddying system. They get trained up in the actual reviewing process. So, but apart from that, I will say to you something that wasn't on the agenda, but I think it's very important. We have not only traditional methods of citation and impact factor assessment, we now have altmetrics, ALTMETRIC, altmetric. So if you haven't heard of it, Google it. Every journal now, when you get a paper published, it will tell you the altmetric, which is your social impact and attention span in media. We have developed a social media strategy in order to make sure that we get out there, right? And the social media strategy is very important, not only for us as senior academics running journals, because it increases the impact, can I just say, because then you can also track whether you are being picked up in policy documents and judgments and so on and so forth. But there's another issue here, which is, now I'm going to your question. Getting out there are many ways of getting your publications out there, but you have to be careful to make sure that you're not contravening the journal policies that you want to publish in. But we have ResearchGate, we have all sorts of different mechanisms to put out working papers. When you do that, and the economists, when I was the Associate Dean, please get us onto all of these things. You know, SSRN is very important because it shows others what you're doing in your field, okay? And there's the social media platforms. I'm not going to talk about Twitter, but I am going to talk to you about LinkedIn. You go to the journals. Every journal now has a LinkedIn page. You can become a follower. You can find out what they're interested in. You can post about your research. Then you can become known. And this is a way of circumventing the biggest issue that we haven't talked about, which is the gatekeepers in our disciplines that make it difficult for any age, any level of seniority. This is where it's very important to have the freedoms that, you know, were counteracted by the publishers that we discussed, the academic freedoms of the people that are in editorial teams to pick the right reviewers, etc. There are biases, right? There are gatekeepers. I think there's a responsibility on us as editors and reviewers to make sure that we are fair and so on and so forth. That goes to an editorial policy by scholars that you would like to think that are, you know, coming with goodwill to circumvent the biases. However, that's not always the case. There are fads, and this happens also with grant bodies and so on. If you happen to be on the right fad, you'll get published quicker, regardless what age you are, right? And so I think these are these sort of less tangible dimensions that we need to be cognizant of. And altmetrics, I just say to you that Web of Science and other traditional methods of picking up citations are now also looking at altmetrics. So it's very important for all scholars to be open to the social media landscape in terms of dissemination and impact.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Lucy said, telling about the policy in West, particularly for, you know, young scholars. So one policy which in West has been implemented now is the third year, actually, we are working with that to overcome this gatekeeper sort of thing Lucy was talking about, is to create what we call the PhD showcase, which is a kind of interesting initiative of West within the, and we could do it because it is true we have SAGE, but we are linked to the British Sociological Association, which to us is very important as a possibility to avoid what happened to gender work and right. So what is this PhD showcase is about? So we give an opportunity for PhD students who have, you know, finalized their own PhD or are going to finalize their own PhD to have their own work published in West. And we do it by providing to them a review process, but which is a kind of spatial review process, which means not that it's a bit more simple, but is more supported. So editors actually are there to support young scholars to publish. And we do it also not only by supporting, you know, you just submit your article in this kind of special section, you get an editor attributed to the paper and then, you know, a review. No, it's not just that. We also organize within West, at the West Sociological Association conference, we organize workshops based on this initiative, where we also kind of train to some extent and guide PhD students in their own process of presenting their own work. We give them support and we kind of say, okay, we provide some sort of feedback on their own work so that then they are actually ready to be able to kind of submit. So that is, I think, a very, very nice initiative of West, which probably could be thought generally. To be honest, and you know, this is very, very interesting, and I'm really, I want to say that the West Prize of SAGE this year has been given to the PhD showcase, so the article which was published by PhD student on bullshit jobs and so forth and whatever. So it was actually, so that was, you know, and this guy has been competing with, yeah, exactly. Senior scholars in the field. So just to say that, okay, constraints exist, barriers exist, but there are also policy which can implement it to support that. Another thing, initiative we are taking, and then I stop, is vis-a-vis the Global South. We decided in West that we would like to support Global South, people from Global South. So what we have been introducing is, you know, rather than rejecting just the paper, if the paper is no good, we give an opportunity, if we think that that paper could make a contribution, to reject and resubmit, and we attribute a special editor to support the particular person. So it's a lot of work we do, but it's very rewarding, I must say. And, you know, yeah, I can testify that. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, there are policy. We are humans behind the machine.
No, I will have a much more pessimistic view because we did that in transfer. No, we did that in transfer. There is a prize for young scholar, and we had two submissions. The first one very good was published. We were very happy, but two. The next year we had two. Then we say it's perhaps because we say should be published within 1 year. So 1 year the people want to have a higher standards, think transfer is just for the trade unionists. So perhaps we don't have, and we have all the support for the people that you mentioned that. But no, we put 3 years and we have 3 submissions. So in the same time, you can have journal. You have a limited number of journal. And then when you open, and perhaps we say, okay, perhaps it's awful. We will just disseminate in conference. People don't know, but it could be also that you have already for this kind of young generation, when they arrive to publish, to say, okay, but I have to publish in the right journal for my career. Even transfer will be, and we have not a bad rating. That's kind of, it's middle of the, but the reputation is not yet there. We will not do that. So we open some opportunity, and still it's rather complex. And on your intervention, but if we follow the question, I think if the publisher asks us to have some kind of block and some kind of other activities, my only question is why? Why they think it's that important? And I will, because where is their interest to do that? What do they have in mind that they push you, that they create this kind of new way of seeing your impact, adding the kind of policy impact, the LinkedIn, the number of friends you have in Facebook and stuff like that. Why they are doing that? What is the interest of the employer, the publisher, that you are doing something that is not clearly of interest for the publisher? What is the added value? What they are selling with that? That's my question.
Their business model. The business model is that they benefit financially from downloads. And if you get more than citations, but if you get greater downloads through social media mentions, then they make money. Simple.
Just maybe if yeah, but just few words. The question is how to get the PhD student, to publish, and how, and I remember anyhow when I started very, very long time ago, we had this process that I found really very helping and very educating, is to always start by submitting papers, communication at association, at congresses, etc. But the difference is we had discussants and we had special, so we had a feedback. It was not just you present and you go home, or you present and everyone applauds. You were there and you had a discussant. The discussant was not there to destroy your work. It was there more to raise some questions, to say, okay, so what about this, some, and this was really a very nice and educated form of a publication and starting. Now you can see in also other conferences, special spaces for PhD students, and again with publishers or with professors from the discipline and from areas. And I think to again discuss, to help, to criticize some of the framework, and I think that this can be very helpful on the road.
Thanks very much. Stephen Muschin, University of Manchester. Well, thanks for the comments from the panel. Helpful, very insightful. I think there's a few things. I was in Berlin over the summer, and just by where I was staying was the headquarters of Springer. Now, this with their $10,000 per article processing charge in Nature and so forth. They have this absolutely colossal headquarters that looks like the Death Star, which is just to the east of where the Berlin Wall was, in basically this kind of like militarized zone. It's just there with an incredibly strange statue of Axel Springer at the front, just fighting totalitarianism. And it just, just as a symbol of kind of how parasitic the industry essentially is, it's kind of mind-blowing. But I suppose all that said, I think one of the things that, beyond the publishing model, it's essentially enabled by our employers isn't it? This is the thing. It's the universities themselves. And I've been having kind of a lot of issues. I've got kind of this head of group role at the moment. And so I'm just sort of constantly having kind of, well, arguments, depressing conversations, whatever you want to call them, with kind of senior academics in the business school that I work in. And there's an obsession with rankings and lists and so forth. There's the Chartered Association of Business Schools list in the UK, which is a sort of like horrific disciplining instrument on the one hand, but actually, this is how strange it's got. I've actually found myself defending that to some extent more recently, because there are certain people within the school who think we shouldn't be using that list. We should actually be using the Financial Times 50 list, which is far narrower. And in terms of our field, you've got Journal of Business Ethics, Human Relations, organization studies, and they're the ones that you might publish in as an IR scholar at a push, but it's still not a natural home by any stretch of the imagination. So there's constant talk about that. We're signed up to the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, Dora, and did she die in vain? You know, and so we push back against that and says, so somehow does this not apply to us? And you come up with this incredibly convoluted thing about, yeah, well, I mean, it says all of that, but basically, as long as we read your work, then, we are actually able to encourage you to publish in these journals. I've had the advice that you gave, I thought was really nice. I mean, because I had, I didn't go along to it, thankfully, but it was a senior professor within our school who held a kind of meeting for early career scholars to give them advice on publishing. And the advice that he gave all these young, bright, enthusiastic students, researchers of ours, was what you really need to do at the beginning of your career is find a senior academic who's got a lot of citations and a strong publication record and publish with them. Just hitch your work, your identity onto this other person, and then watch your stats rise, and then on you go. So, I mean, I suppose one of the biggest problems, really, because it relates to recruitment, it relates to promotion, it relates to, it's not even recruitment and promotion, but it's just basic survival. I mean, some of you may have seen, this is a kind of very British example of a book that's just been published called Shaping for Mediocrity by Gibson Burrell, David Harvey, and others, who are in the critical management studies group at the University of Leicester. They were targeted, they were made redundant, they were punished for having, publishing in any journal with a word critical in the title, or things like political economy, which aren't the kinds of things that are done in mainstream business schools nowadays. And it's a very sad story because they all lost their jobs. They went to tribunals successfully in the end, but that group was basically destroyed because they weren't publishing in journals deemed to be of the right fit and quality as far as the school went. So I mean, it becomes this performance management thing that, and in that, I mean, and it just so happened that the academics who were targeted were also union reps and so forth as well. So all of that was going on. So there's a much wider thing in terms of how our employers use all of this stuff. The publication industry basically collapses if the universities themselves don't actually enable it. And we're all under pressure, obviously, to support that kind of system. I mean, the emperor has no clothes, really. There have to be kind of alternatives, but it's just the way our employers use this to make our lives more unpleasant than they need to be, which I think is one of the biggest problems. Anyway, sorry about turning into a bit of a rant, but
And actually, that's one of the comments I was going to make. I was a little bit surprised. I have a note here in all of these discussions, given the expertise in the room, that no one decided to start talking about, do we use our unions? How do we collectively organize? Lucy's proposition on the table is, in fact, for a network where we can discuss issues of collective concern. Stephen, I think you're absolutely right on the money. At the Deakin Business School, they took the Australian Business Dean's list and and your list and the FT50 and ran an algorithm. And now we don't use the national list anymore. We use some mangled, anyway, where there's no feminist journals. There's very few IR journals. There's very few. IR is not even on it. So the journals that I publish in, for example, right now, and this is why it feels so good to come to Crimp, because I feel like a whole person again. I am technically research inactive. because I publish in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that doesn't count because I publish here, I publish there, and they don't count. And so I'm getting laddered up for disciplinary action. So
Amanda led the charge with the new Associate Dean Research to question the existing list with the algorithm. We had a survey, a petition, and I'll let her tell you what happened, but it goes to answering your point about, you know, really, where do we have voice? And we do not have voice. Even when we have an effort to exercise voice to address the inequity, and I'll hand the mic to Amanda to reflect on that, it doesn't progress because there are interests involved with the people that benefit from the existing lists and rankings, which is problematic.
Je me demande dans quelle mesure, parce que là, vous parlez des voix, de donner de l'espace aux voix, mais je me demande dans quelle mesure on donne la voix à des étudiants comme moi qui travaillent sur des choses qui sont différentes de tout ce que je vois en fait et qui font que moi, je me demande, est-ce que je suis un imposteur dans ça? Est-ce que j'ai une place? Comment je peux faire en fait? Je sens que j'ai moi, tout le monde me dit, ah, t'écris très bien, c'est super ce que tu fais, etc. C'est super. Et puis, voilà. Donc,
when you want to publish, you have to get a senior, a big publisher, senior, and attach to him. And this is a reality also. This is a reality also. This is one of the strategy to navigate in all that. And we are questioning, well, we can put us because this is a two-way relationship with the senior. How we find a way in that things to be, in order to that senior to remark or to know that we are here to even be interesting to collaborate with us.
interview with Black women in France and Quebec and Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guyane, and they told me so much things. And I'm looking at this data and I say, yes, I would like to give them a space so they can, so in the fields, they can hear what they have, their own structural struggling, but how?
Before I pass on the microphone for some answers, I would just want to add a question with regard to the gender dimension in this whole discussion. Couldn't help noticing that in contrast to the other sessions today and yesterday, where the gender balance in the room was about 50-50, or actually more men than women sometimes. Here we are about 70% women, 30% men. And so that makes me wonder whether the question that we discuss here, whether there is also a gender dimension with regard to academic publishing. Being a middle-aged man, I'm curious about that. And we could also add a racial aspect to that, indeed.
I will say something, because I was going to say it's not just about racial, it's about Black scholars. There is a very, very distinct position of exclusion, I would say, for Black scholars, and that's men and women. And that's something which we have not figured out how to wrestle with, I think, and it's something that behooves us, who are very committed to equity and diversity, to actually address that. I do think there's a tremendous gender bias, and this speaks to the gatekeeper conversation. And I think it continues. It happened when I was a junior scholar, but I think it perpetuates itself. I think it's wonderful. We have so many women in these positions who have more influence, but I do think CRIMT has struggled and has been very conscious in its struggle to try and figure out how does it overcome some of those gender, race biases, or at least exclusions. It's not an active bias, but it is an invisibility of, and that's hard to believe. But anyway, so I just want to say, important questions you're posing to us as the senior scholars, and it behooves us to figure out with you how to solve these things.
To your point, yes, and thank you. This is a really important question as well. One in the Journal of Industrial Relations is building an Indigenous strategy as well, and one including an Indigenous editorial mentorship. But in developing that, we were talking to our Indigenous editorial members, and they underscored that one of the key things is Indigenous scholars in Australia tend not to publish in journals because the experience of interfacing with journals without anyone, or the review process where it gets sent out without any knowledge of Indigenous ontologies or methodologies, ends up becoming quite a violent colonial exercise in the publication process. And consequently, Indigenous scholars tend to publish more books. Whoa, remember that? We have whole libraries full of books and in edited volumes. And we brought that. I am the head of the Equity and Opportunity Stream for the Faculty Task Force. And obviously, inequality in research opportunity and outcomes is a huge inflection point. So we advanced these kinds of arguments to the Associate Dean of Research. That didn't seem compelling. Anyway, so these are, but again, Stephen, to your point, we can have all of the Indigenous employment strategies we want at universities, but if we're not recognizing and valuing and inviting different voices into our publication world, or right, I'm very tired, I'm sure we all are, then in fact it's totally performative. Tania, last word to Tania, Saba, and then I am calling a wrap.
Lucia, still something that no, I want just to say, okay, things are, we're struggling, okay, on all these issues, but I would like at least to go on some, optimistic reviews. First one is, if we look at the research, the funding of research in Canada, it all now, any submission for grants, etc., has to be accompanied by how EDI is taken into account in the methodology, in the objects of the research, and in the research teams. So there is going to be a lot of room, and I'm talking about the $1 million grants. I'm talking about the Fondation Canadienne de l'Innovation, the FCI, the innovation funds. I'm talking about, the millions that the government gives. The main issue here is it a political issue? And is it going to change with the government? And it has to be a scientific and a social issue and not a political issue. So this has to be there. This is the first point. The second point, I would like to talk about the initiative of Quebec, because I was there all morning to learn that Taylor and Francis and etc. have been there for centuries. And it seems that it's the same family members that are still on board. I didn't know that. And making how much money, exactly what you said about Springer. Anyhow. We had their anyhow. But the thing is, the government, the Quebec, the scientifique en chef, so Rémi Quirion, and it was really on his initiative with the Francophone universities, because we have the issue of we have to teach in French, we learn in French, etc. And how come we need to publish in English to get, our tenure, etc. So there has been a really big initiative. And 15 million were given a few months ago to create what's called the Réseau Québécois de recherche et de mutualisation des revues savantes, meaning that they're inviting all the publications, all the scientific journal published in French or bilingual to share services. so that all these publications that are done within universities, etc., receive some money, receive some funding, not directly, but through shared services. And this was the discussion today on what we can do about it. But the interesting thing is that you have 18 libraries around the table that are helping researchers, and these are, of course, libraries in universities. Second, there is a platform, which is Erudit, who is helping for the publications, for, you know, the visibility, etc., helping with the system. And third, you have an expertise on the impact and the evaluation of the impact of the publication. I really think it was really great that all the ingredients are there. You're gonna have to come back next year and the year after to tell you if it's working or not. But so far, the initiative. So I think between the two, you know, the sensitivity towards, you know, publishing in French and making the visibility needs, again, efforts. It's not gonna happen. It's not because we've been talking about it for ages, but it's the first time that there is money that's on the table that's gonna help that.
So can I just say congratulations to Quebec. Let's all move. No. What I think the positive point that you want to make is it starts with small steps, right? In the 1990s, when I was a Labor historian only, I got on a soapbox because Labor history conferences were entirely white. Not just white, no migrants. Nothing. You go to an IR conference in Australia, AIRANS. If you're lucky, there will be people of different origins, etc., etc. I think what we are trying to do with JIR is to put a wedge in, and I think we are doing that. We've got a special issue on Sub-Saharan Africa. We've got Indigenous people on our editorial team. When I reviewed the journal, which is 65 years old this year, before 2023, 7 articles from 1959 had been published on Indigenous in employment relations, none by an Indigenous person. Now we have 1 article on Indigenous employment relations by an Indigenous person. It's small. It's a small step. But I think, you know, my positive point is you have to start somewhere, and people need to do this with their journals. I don't know whether it's a Wes thing or whether your journals are, you know, we have to live, you know, walk the talk. No, final.
Perhaps just one point of an emerging inequality, I think, because you know that there is many articles in open access. I just check on transfer. 80% of the article, the most read the last 3 months, are open access. We have open access 40%. So it means, or the open access are much better than the rest, or if you are rich, from a rich country, you have open access and you are read. And some university have access to every, if you are very good to university, but my university, your university are poor. So most of the stuff that I arrive, not open access, I don't have access. And that's an emerging point, that you will have people from rich country paying for open access and will be quote, and the rest, if you are from Moldavia, you have no chance that the government or the university can pay. And I think that's something emerging as a key challenge for inequality between scholars around the world. It's short. No, you don't have.
Now, on this open access stuff, I mean, what we are doing in KU Leuven, and that's the way also I've been overcoming all this payment of open access for articles. We have created our own self-archiving open access that we do via the library system. So, because that's another thing I wanted to say, you know, probably linked. So one thing we should also try perhaps to think upon is university. Yeah, I fully agree. And I said also, university are buying in, but we could also ourselves push universities to create that kind of services. And there are some universities doing it. I mean, my university now is doing it. I don't know whether other universities are doing it, but and that could be a product. That could be so that is a product that we could use for our own purpose. It's like, you know, appropriating of empowering. So appropriating the technology or whatever, appropriating, you know, this kind of open access. Yeah, reclaiming. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Okay.
Right.